Badass of the Week is an iHeartRadio podcast produced by High Five Content.
It is 1982. Greg Watson is an ordinary college student trying to get through sophomore year at the University of Texas. He's trying to figure out what to write about for his term paper in his difficult poli-sci course. He's digging through stacks of old books in the college library when something catches his eye. A long-forgotten bill proposed to Congress by Founding Father James Madison all the way back in 1792. It said, essentially, that sitting members of Congress could not pass a law giving themselves an increase in salary. Greg looks at this a while, thinks about it, and then starts writing. He hammers out a paper arguing that perhaps this law could technically still be passed through Congress. His teacher gives him a C. Greg gets annoyed. He protests. The professor stays firm. But Greg has confidence in his own argument. He keeps writing. But this time, it's letter after letter to state legislature after state legislature. 10 years later, after Greg's poli-sci class, and 2 centuries after James Madison originally proposed it, Greg Watson gets another C, but this time, C is for constitutional amendment. Greg Watson got enough states to ratify the 27th Amendment.
Hello, and welcome back to Badass of the Week. My name is Ben Thompson, and I'm here with my co-host, Pat Larish. And Pat, today we have a very special guest coming on the show. We are here talking to AJ Jacobs. He is the host of The Puzzler. He's a multiple New York Times bestselling author. AJ, thank you so much for coming here and being on the show. We really are happy to have you here.
I am delighted. I'm a fan of the show, and I'm glad that I can add some new badasses to your list, because you have covered quite a few badasses.
We have covered quite a few, and I'm really excited to have you come on, because we'll get into it in a minute. But some of the badasses you suggested are stories that are new to me, so that's hard. It's sometimes hard to stump me with badasses, and I'm impressed that you were able to do that. We were on AJ's show recently. We did a badass episode of The Puzzler, and that was a really, really fun time. And so it's really nice to get to have you to come on and do a show with us.
Well, I am delighted. History can often be a puzzle, so I think we have a lot of crossover in our podcasts.
Yes. Yeah. So AJ, I first encountered your work right around the time that the first Badass book came out, because we were shelved in the same section of Borders and Barnes and Noble. Because when Badass came out, it was in like weird comedic nonfiction section, and
that's a good section.
Yeah,
I'm honored to be your section mate.
Yes, and I remember I was like going when the book first came out. It was the first book. I was going to the bookstores to like see my book on the shelf and like take pictures and send it to people because it was so awesome. And I came across The Year of Living Biblically, where you took a year and tried to live as close to the rules as set forth in the Old Testament as possible.
That's exactly it. Yes.
Yes. I thought it was amazing.
And you're still here to talk about it.
I am still here. Yes. And I'm not divorced, despite what I put my wife through.
Oh, dear.
Well, I thought it was hilarious. It was a really funny idea. The whole tone of the book was funny. I loved the book. And earlier this month, earlier in May, you released a new book called The Year of Living Constitutionally.
Right.
And we don't mean like taking your daily constitutional where you go out for a walk to take in the air after your dinner.
Good point. That is, although they did take walks back then, I would imagine.
Yeah, but this is not what it's about.
No, it's actually a semi-sequel to the one that Ben just mentioned, The Year of Living Biblically, because I thought that was such a fascinating project, and it was bizarre. I followed the 10 Commandments, but I also followed the hundreds of rules about you can't shave the corners of your beard. I didn't know where the corners were, so I just grew a huge Gandalf-like beard. So I was able to get a crash course in the Bible, but also talk a lot about how we should interpret the Bible and how literally or metaphorically should we interpret it, which of course has huge implications of how we live. And I always thought I could do a similar thing with the Constitution because there's this debate on how to interpret it and how close should we hew to the original text versus how much evolution.
We have an entire room full of Supreme Court justices who have to interpret this for us, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. And also, a lot of the rules in the Bible are for individual or family level life.
Right. That's so true.
Like the whole thing about shellfish, that's okay. Yeah, that's a personal / household level decision. But the Constitution, that's what does it mean to live constitutionally?
Well, I tried to express my rights using the technology and mindset of our founding fathers. So that meant...
So did you have to pay a lot of fines?
I did pay some fines. I also had... I walked around New York with my musket, my 18th century musket, because that's what they used. So I got some raised eyebrows.
And did you also wear a tricorn hat?
Oh, sure. I wore a tricorn.
Okay. Is that the picture? Is that the cover picture?
There is a cover picture of that. Yeah.
Okay.
No, I dress the part. Like I commit to the bit, as my son says. So I go all in. And I gave up social media in favor of writing pamphlets with a quill pen. And
how did your mental health react to this?
My mental health?
Yeah. Like if you're ditching, some people take social media fasts.
Well, I will say one of the themes of the book is that there are a lot of parts of the 18th century we do not want to return to. It was a sexist, racist, smelly time where cutting edge medicine was the tobacco smoke enema, where they would literally blow smoke up your ass. Like that. And
is that where that comes from? Is that where that phrase comes from?
I have spent several hours trying to figure that out, and I'm still not. There are people who say yes and people who say no. So I can't commit, but it is what they did. They would blow smoke up your ass to cure all
that
sorts
is indelibly associated with that phrase now.
Exactly.
In my mind.
That's
whether
what
or
I
not
think of.
There's a historical basis. Yeah. Okay.
On the other hand, there are elements of 18th century life that were wonderful. One was writing offline, so you're not continually distracted by the dings and chimes of the internet. So I wrote with a quill. I don't think everyone has to write with a quill, but just writing offline and thinking offline, and
so you wrote with your actual, like you wrote.
Oh yeah,
handwriting.
I wrote with my quill.
Oh my goodness, you didn't even type it. You wrote with your fingers and a pen and a quill pen and ink.
And it was wonderful.
Whoa, that's old school.
That was the point, yeah. And the idea is it lends itself to cold takes instead of hot takes. And that's what I like about it.
You can sit there and think about your answers before you,
exactly.
you have extra time to think of your responses to internet comments.
Right. That's it. And it makes a difference. I mean, I honestly... I can't imagine if the Constitution were written on a Google Doc with with internet commenters, we wouldn't have a country.
That's
my goodness. And it's constantly updating, and never mind the content, but like if you were trying to add a paragraph between paragraphs 2 and 3, and I'm trying to write something like between paragraphs 3 and 4, and then it's all like moving around, like literally moving around as I type. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things. So I do history a lot, and people will tell me like, one of the questions I get a lot is like, oh, what time period would you want to go back to? My answer is always none. You would never want to go back in time, because I want ibuprofen and penicillin, and I don't want to get thrown off my horse and lose my arm, What you said is, but also like, I don't use social media, so that's probably why.
Oh, good for you. Yeah, you seem well adjusted. I think now we know why. All right.
Yeah. If we could pick and choose, that would be great. Yes. Like a la carte, going back time in history, like lack of social media, but also lack of cholera.
Like a weekend trip that you could like run to the U.S. Embassy and get helicopter lifted out of it if things are going really bad.
Yeah.
Brilliant idea.
So when you were going to come on the show, we said like it might be fun for you to come and talk about some constitutional badasses. And you seemed pretty excited about that. And you showed up with a list.
I did. I love the assignment because I read hundreds of books and I talked to dozens of constitutional scholars. And there are tons of badasses from that era.
Oh, yeah.
And I figured I could have gone with ones that there are the famous badasses. So James Madison, who's called the father of the Constitution, he is a badass in that he prepared, like he's the ultimate tryhard. He, as my kids say, he came, I know, I love tryhard. He studied for months before the convention, read hundreds of books, and came with an outline of the way our government that he saw that he wanted it to be. And our current government they made changes, but it really is that structure that James Madison outlined. So he is a badass. We wouldn't have the structure we have without him. But I also thought people can get that elsewhere. Maybe I should try for some more lesser known unsung heroes, unsung badasses.
And I like the allusion to yet another podcast.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So people, even Ben and I don't know about.
Well, yes,
I hadn't heard a lot of these stories. So like that's going to be a really fun thing as we go through this.
It's not easy to do with both of you. Exactly.
Yeah, no kidding, right? And I wrote a book about the American Revolution and the following things. So I'm very excited to get into this. We are going to take a quick ad break before we go in. But before that, AJ, I have a weird thing that we're going to bring you in on here. So I have been doing this thing recently where I am like one episode behind on whatever drink I'm supposed to be drinking. So like for Cinco de Mayo, I was 1 week late on that. And I was drinking my Mexican beer while we were doing the Winston Churchill, SOE episode, and they were drinking whiskey soda. So then last week we were doing a different episode and I was drinking the whiskey soda. So I'm just one episode behind on whatever drink I'm supposed to be drinking. And last week, Pat came on and she regaled us with stories from Mongolian mythology. So she was talking about the Mongolian King Arthur.
From the Epic of Jangar.
Yes, Jangar is the Mongolian.
Handsome Mingyan rode across solo, him and his horse, across the steppes of Central Asia to steal 10,000 pintos from Turk Altan Khan.
It's amazing. The Mongolian mythology is amazing. And you've got Handsome Mingyan and Scarlet Lion Kongor, and they're all Ironhead manga, and they're all fighting each other. And the talking horses. It's amazing.
I'm in. I'm sold.
But in practical terms, Ben, through, I'm assuming, the magic of the internet, was able to acquire.
Yes. So Pat, maybe you should let us know what is the drink of the court of Jangar and Mongolian mythology.
Well, you've got tea because everyone drinks tea because tea is awesome. And when you're not drinking tea, you might be drinking fermented mare's milk, which is kind of yogurty, kind of kefir-like. I'm assuming, I haven't actually tried it.
Well,
no way.
I have in my possession currently from mongolianstore.com. While we were on a commercial break in last week's episode, I realized I needed to order mongolianstore.com. Will send you fermented mare's milk. It's $20 plus like an extra $20 to ship it to you. So
their logo is a horse.
The logo is a horse. It's a white horse on a blue field. There's not a single word in the English alphabet, in the Latin alphabet on this container. It's called Airag.
Yeah, Mongolian.
Yeah, this is Airag.
Mongolian uses the Cyrillic alphabet, which is basically the same as the Russian alphabet or Ukrainian alphabet. Airag, yeah. And
so it's all in.
So have you tasted it yet?
No, I was waiting. I was gonna do it for the
exciting.
show. You said commit to the bit earlier.
Folks.
That is what I've decided I'm
I
going to do.
love that. And fermented as an alcoholic? Is it fermented?
Alcoholic horse milk, mare's milk.
Alcoholic horse
Mare's
milk.
milk sounds more fancy than horse milk.
Sure.
Here we go.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And it looks like the bottle has like this. It's a plastic. Is it a plastic bottle?
It is a plastic bottle. It arrived cold, so I refrigerated it, which might not be authentic to the Mongolian steppes, but it also had like a sediment, so I had to shake it a bit before I opened it.
Yeah.
I am very excited.
Yeah. It only comes in sizes of a liter. And it smells like
Will
old
you
milk.
finish that by the end of the every time I say the word Constitution, you take a sip? Something like that?
Is that the plan? All right.
Is this going to affect your constitution, Ben?
I think this is going to require a Constitution saving throw. Here we go.
Okay, so for listeners at home, Ben has chugged, or Ben has partaken, and
He's coughing.
Okay.
Ben is reflecting on the experience.
Tasting notes. It tastes like old milk, and smells like. But you get the aftertaste or whatever. What's the wine term for the legs? What is it? The taste after.
No, the legs is what sticks on the glass.
There's a term for this.
The aftertaste. I think aftertaste.
It's called
back note. No,
I don't know. Wine tasting.
Oh dear. I went to a wine tasting class. I should know this stuff.
Wine tasting terminology.
Okay. No, you should look up IROG tasting terminology. Come on.
Sure. This is a doc I'm not going to scan through. Okay, so the initial taste on the tongue is old milk, but the follow through is like hay, like horse, like a stables.
Oh. Is that good? Is that something you like?
You've only had one chug, right?
I've only had one taste on it. I will probably try it again. It's the only thing I brought to drink for our recording, so I will be drinking fermented mare's milk as we proceed. I tried to get my wife to drink it with me, and she said that no. She started retching at the thought of it. But
okay.
maybe
it's an acquired taste.
It's an acquired taste, and maybe I will acquire the taste for it by the end of this episode.
Well, I want to see how alcoholic it is. I want to see how.
I'm curious, right? That's another
you
thing.
Are.
Yeah. Does it? I was going to say, does it say if it's alcoholic? But the entire label is in Mongolian. So.
Yes. So it is alcoholic, but it's like how you can buy certain types of... the alcohol percentage is low enough that you can order it online and they'll ship it to your house and you don't need a signature.
Like some types of kombucha or whatever.
Right. I think maybe a little more potent than that. I think like like a cooking, like a rice wine that you can cook with, like those kind of things are like they're
I don't drink that.
Minimally alcoholic. You cook with them. You're not supposed to really drink them, but they're so I'm gonna.
Well, I'm very impressed. He's going again. People.
Getting in touch with your inner Scarlet Lion Kongor.
Yeah. I mean, the real strong flavor here is hay.
It has terroir.
Like being in a barn. Like you really feel the horse. You
right.
The horse really comes through in this flavor here. Okay.
Well, I'm impressed.
So if I invited Mr. Ed over for drinks, this is what I would serve.
I mean, this is kind of I think that's fair. Okay. We're going to take a quick break and we're going to come back and we're going to talk about something other than me drinking horse milk.
We're rooting for you, Ben. We're totally rooting for you.
Hello and welcome back. I have tried the fermented mare's milk once more during the break. It's still growing on me, I think. So AJ, you're going to have to think for next week, you're going to have to come up with a constitutional drink for us. Of some sort.
I got lots of constitutional drinks. There's Martha Washington's rum punch. Delicious, Pat, and it does.
What's the recipe? Tell us.
It's got.
Or send it to us.
I'll send it to you, but it's got. I think it's citrusy. It's got a little citrus and rum, but there's also Madeira. That was a huge favorite, which is fortified wine from Portugal. So yes, you have lots of options.
Okay, so. AJ, you are here to talk about constitutional badasses. You're not here to talk about my dumb tricks of drinking fermented horse milk. But we're going to get into the first person you brought to the show, and this was a story that I had never heard before. And looking through your notes on it and doing a little bit more research on him, like I was very impressed by Greg Watson. So why don't you tell us a little bit about this guy and why you picked him?
Yes. Well, he is fascinating. This badass is named Greg Watson, and he's more recent. He is the last person to get a constitutional amendment passed. And researching this, I didn't realize how hard it is to get a constitutional amendment passed. There have been almost 11,000 amendments that have come to the floor of Congress.
And I bet some of them are pretty loopy.
Oh, yeah, some of them are quite loopy. One of my favorites was early 1900s. They had one that was, one congressman wanted to change the name of the United States of America to the United States of Earth, which I thought was a little bit of an overreach, but
it's a little too soon. You have to wait until the alien invasion before you can kind of unite the Earth under the United States of Earth.
Exactly. But this one, only 27 of those 11,000 have passed, and
that's a pretty low ratio.
Very difficult. And this one, the last one to pass, was in 1992, and it was largely due to this man, this unsung hero that very few know about, named Gregory Watson. And what happened was, it was 1982, 10 years before, and he was a student at the University of Texas at Austin. And he wrote a paper for his poli-sci class on a little-known amendment that had been proposed by James Madison. James Madison, when he proposed those original 10 amendments, like freedom of speech, right to bear arms, there were a couple of more that never made it, that didn't get enough votes. So they never actually made it to an amendment.
Like the apocryphal books of the Bible that didn't get approved.
Exactly. It's sort of, the director's cut that just didn't make it.
Director's cut, yeah.
And one of them was this amendment that's perfectly reasonable. It seems like a good amendment, which was that Congress cannot give itself an immediate raise. It can't say, we can be paid $1 million this year. So Congress can give a raise to the following Congress, but not themselves.
Which might not be you if you weren't reelected.
Exactly. So
there's wisdom in this.
Yeah, it made sense. But it never got enough. You need 3/4 of the states to get an amendment.
Well, you need
ratified.
You need the Congress to approve this. That they can't approve.
Yes, that's true.
That's the hard part.
Yeah.
Well,
no, I don't want to give myself a raise. That sounds
fair. When
fair.
you say 3/4 of the states, what do you mean? Yeah.
Well, what happened was Congress did approve this one, but it went to the states and it only got, I think it was 7 and you needed 8, something along those lines, because you need the state legislatures out of 13. Right. You needed 3/4 out of 13. So it never made it. And but what he argued was it never died. It was sort of in this zombie state, this limbo, because it never was rejected. And he said, why not bring it back and see if we can get 3/4 of the current 50 states to approve it? His poli-sci teacher said, that's a dumb idea, and gave his paper a C. And
was the poli-sci teacher trolling him?
Well, who knows? But he did not take kindly to that C. And he said, as soon as he got the C, he said, I'm going to get this thing passed. So it was a little bit out of revenge.
That's amazing, because the way you were telling the story, I was like, he was promoting, like, I assumed he was like a state senator, or he was a member of Congress and he was submitting this to Congress. I didn't realize he was some guy at the University of Texas being like, hey, this is my senior thesis, and he got a C on it, and he got so mad about getting a C on his thing that he decided he was going to push an amendment through Congress.
As a teacher, okay, I'm a high school teacher. I'm taking notes. Like, do I provoke my students this way? Like, do I deliberately give them bad grades just to goad them to do things in the world and make change for the better out of spite?
Yes, I think maybe that's
okay.
It seems effective, yeah. Yeah.
Okay, if any of my students are listening to this, A, if you're underage, don't drink alcohol, and B, if you get a bad grade from Dr. Larish, it means you're destined for greater things.
There you go. I like.
Although you
great
drink,
takeaways.
although you can get Mongolian horse milk sent to your house via the mail without an ID. You two could be drinking
Ben,
Irod right now.
Okay, strike that from the record. Okay. Anyway, moving on.
So moving
I'm looking out
on,
for you
he
guys.
got the C, and he said, "I'm going to get this passed." And he started a letter writing campaign because that's the way you did it back in 1982. And he sent letters to all these state legislatures, and the state of Maine was the first to pass it, and it took 10 years. And finally, he got enough. He got 3/4 of the 50 states. I think Michigan was the final one. He said he was listening on the phone as they did the final A.
Oh, wow.
And it became the 27th Amendment. It was ratified, and it is remarkable because, yeah, like you say, he was not an elected legislature. He was just a regular college kid, and he made it happen.
Yeah.
And I interviewed him for my book. Great character, very quirky, as you can imagine. And I asked him, like, can we get a 28th Amendment? Can you get us another one? And he said, no, it is so polarized now that it will be very hard to get a 28th Amendment, even something as nonpartisan as this one about Congress, and that might have been hard to get nowadays. So
that's a really interesting thing about the politics right now, right? Where it's like, oh, well, Maine approved this, then we don't like it. It's like very different.
Exactly.
You would never have passed the Constitution under those circumstances either, right?
Right. Well, one of the takeaways I got from talking to these scholars is that the founders never thought it would be this difficult to get amendments through. They wanted it to be hard.
Oh, yeah. You don't want amendments for like, let's make jelly beans illegal or something.
Right. You wanted
or alcohol, but that passed.
Exactly, yeah.
That passed, and then and then it didn't.
We're not glamorizing alcohol here.
But yeah, so they did not anticipate this rigid two-party system. James Madison knew there would be factions. That's what he called the parties. But he thought there would be lots of different factions, and they would be sort of shifting and creating, sort of like a European Parliament system. And we're stuck with these two very rigid, and that makes it incredibly hard to get 2/3 of Congress to agree on anything.
Wow.
So anyway, I'm very grateful to Greg Watson for getting the 27th and hopefully not last, but certainly the most recent amendment to the Constitution passed.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing. He's just some guy mad about getting a bad grade in his poli-sci class, and he pushed through a constitutional amendment.
Exactly.
Awesome.
Thank you, Greg.
Thank you, Greg. That was an awesome story. And that kind of fits the vibe of Badass a lot of like, one thing that we like to try to do on the show is take kind of well-known characters. Even James Madison was just some guy at some point, right? And like just kind of anybody can the idea is that like anybody can succeed if they, it's not easy, but you can, right? There's the Badass is generally a message of hope that like you too could do great things if you, just keep going and push through. And
right.
I feel like this summarizes that really well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And some of our badasses are warriors, and like they will chop your head off with an axe. And some of our badasses are people who do the reading.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, Scarlet Lion Kongor took an axe in the back and was laid up for 40 days, but then like came back and slew the entire army of Ironhead Mongoose single-handedly. And Greg Watson got mad at his teacher and passed the constitutional amendment. I mean, they're both badass. Very different sides of the spectrum, but like, let's raise a glass of Igar to Greg Watson.
Yes. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
I love that.
Yes.
And Greg Watson, he did the reading.
Yes.
He did the reading. That's
He's a very Pat badass.
Yes. Yeah.
It's a very Dr. Larish badass.
Very Dr. Larish badass. If any of my students are listening, do the reading.
Yes.
And the writing. He wrote hundreds of letters.
Yes.
Oh my goodness, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Just getting mad about a thing doesn't make you a badass. You have to actually enact change.
Yeah. What are you going to do with it? Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So who is the next constitutional badass that you brought with,
The next
with you, AJ?
badass it's in the same theme of getting an amendment passed. This one's a little bit of a more famous amendment. This is the 19th Amendment, which gave women the vote. And it was actually the process of passing the 19th Amendment was a bit of a nail biter because it came down to one state. Because as I said,
Which state?
It was Tennessee. It was Tennessee.
Okay.
You need 3/4. At that time, it was 1920. You needed, it was 48 states, so I believe you need 36. And it came down to, it was one state. It was Tennessee. And so the state legislature had to vote on it, and it was an incredibly close vote. And it came down to just a couple of state senators who had, if they had voted a different way, women would not have the vote. So there was this guy named Harry Byrne, Representative Harry Byrne in Tennessee, and for a while, everyone thought he was going to vote against women's right to vote. People wore different colored flowers. The red flower meant that you were against women voting. I believe it was
like red as in stop.
Red as in stop, exactly. And then the yellow flower meant yes, that we were that you were in favor of women voting.
Because like in our stoplight imagery, you don't actually have green roses, so yellow as in like, yeah, okay, you can keep going.
Proceed with caution, yeah.
Proceed with caution.
Yeah, okay. Well, yeah, with caution or just full. Okay, so it's yellow. Yeah.
Yellow light means pedal to the metal.
Okay,
go
maybe
fast.
that's it.
You're about to lose the light. Go.
Yeah, but people were like buying like flowers at like whatever the equivalent of Trader Joe's was at the time, and like putting them on the lapel, and yeah. So Harry Byrne, he was
originally against women's suffrage, but he arrived on the day of the vote and surprised everyone by voting for women's right to vote. And his vote was the one that pushed it over and is the reason that we have the 19th Amendment and that millions of women have their right to vote, which they should have.
Whoa.
And the reason...
So is Harry Byrne the badass here, or...?
Well, you would think he would be. But there's someone who was even more badass than him, which is Harry Byrne's mom. Because on the morning of the vote, she wrote a note and she put it in his suit pocket for him to find. And she wrote in the note, "Be a good boy." That was literally, be a good boy and vote for women's rights, and because your mom tells you to. And that's what turned him. He said that later when he was interviewed, he said, my mom is always wise and right, and I'm not going to go against my mom. So to me, the mom, whose name was Febb Byrne, Febb Burn, she is the badass. So we can all thank her for giving women the vote. To me, just that one little note had such an impact on history. It's almost cinematic. It's
I could definitely see that being the climax of a movie, right? Like he's there and he's about to make the vote, and he's got like a note in his jacket pocket, and he's like pulls it out. He's like, I don't understand what this is, and it's a note, and it's written in the handwriting that he remembers as being a child, and it says, "Be a good boy," and he's like, I know now what I must do.
It might be exaggerated, but it comes from sources like the National Constitution Center, which is a wonderful and very legitimate source that has a charter from Congress. So these are real. This really happened. There is an exaggeration. Apparently, some people claim that the the legislators were so angry. The anti-women legislators chased him out of the building and he had to jump out a window to escape. That I could not verify. But what I could verify is he voted because his mom left him a note. So thank you, badass Feb Byrne.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Wow. That's an amazing story.
Yeah. And Andrew, when you said you were interested in talking about Feb Byrne, I Googled around and there's an article from the Washington Post and they have some quotes from the famous letter.
Oh, really? Oh, good. Yeah.
So on page 4 of the letter. So
wow, it's a long letter.
She says, referring to re-election, I hope you see enough of politicians to know it is not one of the greatest things to be one. What say ye?
Interesting.
So, so mom, who is very influential, is questioning his career choices.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And then on page 6, this is an epic letter, apparently. Context, the president of the National American Women's Suffrage Association at the time was a woman named Carrie Chapman Catt. And in her letter to Harry, Feb wrote, "Don't forget to be a good boy and help Mrs. Thomas Catt, i.e. Tomcat, with her rats. Is she the one that put rat in ratification?" So, in any other context, this would be a dad joke, but here I'm going to call it a mom joke.
That's her joke. She put the rat in
That's her
ratification.
joke. That's her joke.
I thought that was
She
you.
wrote
I thought that was you. I thought that was because that's also
No.
a Pat joke.
Yeah. I mean, I love puns more than I should, but this was Feb Byrne's pun.
Yeah, she put some thought into that.
She did, apparently.
I love it. Yeah. And she's with the wordplay and everything. And even with the wordplay, he decided to follow her. Like if I got that, I'd be like, I was with you until the ratification.
Grow.
Yeah, you lost me there.
Yeah. Mom.
That's great. I hadn't read the whole letter. I had just seen the excerpt of Be a Good Boy. So thank you for doing that digging. That's
fantastic. Thank you to the Washington Post. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we have a couple more badasses we're going to get to. But before we do that, we are going to take a quick break because sadly I have to bail on this IROG. I got about half done. I got maybe a half liter in, but I can't do this anymore.
Put it back in the fridge.
I got to get something else. I'm going to put it in the actual milk container and see if I can surprise some of the members of my family with it. But we're going to take a really quick break to hear from our sponsors. And when we come back, we'll get back into the story. All right, welcome back. We are here with AJ Jacobs, the author of The Year of Living Constitutionally. And AJ has been talking to us about various constitutional badasses. So AJ, who is next on your list of constitutional badasses you wanted to talk about?
My next badass is Jonathan Harridan, who... to give you a little context, what happened was when I was reading the Constitution, which I had never done before, and apparently 60% of Americans have not read the whole Constitution.
I don't think I've read it word for word the whole way.
Yeah.
No, I don't think I've read it word for word the whole way, at least not in one sitting. But I do want to say that, and this is a very specific shout out to my sister. In high school, a combination of our 10th grade and 11th grade high school teachers gave us pocket constitutions. These were literally constitutions, like, small, I don't know, like maybe they were like 3 inches by 5 inches. It was the Constitution in a little thing that you could stick in your purse or whatever, know.
Sure. I got one right here.
Okay, woo! Shout out to everyone who has ever had a pocket constitution. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, all I know about, the preamble's the famous one, but even with the preamble, you kind of get into we, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, and blah 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 blah.
Exactly.
You never get get to the end of that first sentence before you start giving up on trying to recite it, because that first sentence is like it's 800 words long.
Yeah, it's 52 words. I know that. And it is a lovely sentence. But the other sentence, there are many other sentences that are much more obscure, including this one in Article 1, Section 8, where it says that Congress has the ability to grant letters of marque and reprisal. Now, I had no idea what that meant, so I Googled it, of course, talked to some scholars. Turns out it's basically government-sanctioned piracy. It's legalized piracy.
Whoa.
Yes.
Let's linger on that phrase. Government-sanctioned piracy.
Right. So it's privateers is the preferred term. So America did not have much of a navy in the Revolutionary War, so they outsourced it. So they said to private citizens, if you take your fishing boat and ask us for permission, you can put some guns on, you could go out and capture British ships and keep the booty. You get to keep whatever's on board, the guns, the sherry, there was often booze on board, there was uniforms, supplies, food. So
maybe citrus fruits.
Probably that was, so there was, it was sort of a market-based solution for our lack of navy. Some were whaling ships, some were merchant ships, some were quite small. Some were like, I think 20 feet, but then they went up to bigger. And what was amazing is these, I had not heard much about them, but they were incredibly important to the revolution. We would probably not have a country if it weren't for these privateers, because there were hundreds of them, and they captured about 2,000 British ships. So
2,000 wow.
British ships.
But this was the thing that people were doing. So this was a common thing for this time period where you didn't have these huge countries weren't paying for huge standing armies and navies. They had Francis Drake was a privateer, and they would kind of commission these guys. Were like, you got a ship, you got a crew, you got cannons, go do what you're going to do. As long as you're, if we decide to make peace with Britain and we're not at war with them anymore, and then you attack them, now you're a pirate. But if we're at war with them and, you want to get in your fishing boat and go out there and attack these guys and steal their stuff, go have fun, man. We're at war with them. It doesn't matter. And, it's just, and so that was a thing that was very common in Europe at the time, but you don't really think about the United States you think about U.S. having pirates. We've got a lot of pirate operations off the coast. We've got Blackbeard and Anne Bonny. I mean, they're all British, but they're operating off the coast of the U.S. But we don't really have this privateer. We don't really have this privateer. We don't really have this privateer culture. But it's fascinating to me that it's written into the Constitution that Congress can commission privateers.
And what's interesting to me is I think part of the reason why they're not more famous is because they've got this taint of piracy. They're sort of pirate adjacent. And so it's not something.
But pirates are cool. I mean, I don't know if they should be, but they are.
Privateers are even cooler because they're not just random murderers. They're revolutionary freedom fighters, right? They're guerrilla soldiers, right? They're irregular infantry, right? Well, and so, but they're fighting for their country. Ostensibly, they're getting rich off it, but they're mercenaries. They don't have to pay
at the expense of the enemy,
right? Or
the oppressor, or whatever, however you want to characterize.
Yeah. Well, that's it. That's it. I mean, I think I'm very grateful for them, but I think that they are. It's a little more complicated than a noble ideal of liberating yourself, because there is the profit motive. So it's mixed, but people are complicated.
I mean, people got to pay rent.
Well, there you go. I mean, the author I spoke to who wrote a book about it is named Eric Dolan, and he said, it's a good example of the birth of our country was not an immaculate conception. It was very messy. It was ugly, and there was slavery, and so we have to accept that. But that doesn't mean that we can't try to live up to America's noblest ideals. So anyway, that's all to say that there were a lot of these privateers. But one of the more famous ones was this guy, Jonathan Harridan, who was, he was sort of LeBron James of privateers, and he captured many ships, and he went up there against 3 British ships and beat them all. And apparently he had a lot of bluster. So he would have these trumpets, but not actual trumpet. They were, microphone trumpets. And he would say into the trumpet, like, this is an American frigate. Give up or we will send broadsides to you and sink you. So often they would capture these British ships without firing a shot. So anyway, that's our badass. That's privateersman Jonathan Harridan.
And that's an amazing thing, right? And so, one of my favorite Revolutionary War heroes is a guy named Pierre-Augustin de Beaumarchais. And he was a French guy. And his job was, he was a smuggler, right? So you've got these privateers that were instrumental in, and so, I have to double check that. And so Jonathan Harridan, he's fighting British shipping as a privateer, but like this is saving the Republic, whether that is during the American Revolution. He's operating a little later, so he's fighting during the War of 1812. We're still at war with England, and they're still trying to retake the colonies. Like that's not a zero probability event that like the Republic collapses and we become a British colony again. And he's helping sink these ships, but he's doing a thing that the British would consider illegal. If they caught him, they would hang him as a pirate. Right. This guy, Pierre-Augustin de Beaumarchais, like he was a French guy, and his one thing he was doing was smuggling weapons out of France to the American revolutionaries. So he would like load up ships that were leaving France that were supposed to have food or whatever, or cloth or whatever to trade with the New World. He'd sail them to the colonies, and they were full of guns. And he's a lot of the weapons and uniforms, like, there's a certain point during the American Revolution where the colonial army starts wearing blue uniforms rather than just their clothes. Like he sent those over there from France. He styled them after the French uniforms to improve morale. Yeah, he brought French rifles. So a lot of the rifles you see later on in the American Revolution were made in France, and they were smuggled over by this guy. But same thing. He was doing most of this while France was not at war with England. So the French government was trying to shut him down and find him. And he's on the run from the French. He's on the run from the British. Everybody's trying to stop him. But that's the kind of story that you get with Jonathan Harridan, where like he's, it's almost Mission Impossible, where like if he does get caught, the U.S. isn't going to bail him out. They're not going to prisoner transfer for him. Yeah, he's we will disavow all knowledge of your existence and have fun in the dock.
Right. That is so interesting. I had one other thing on. You had mentioned the uniforms that Beaumarchais. When I talked to these scholars, it turns out that a lot of the British ships were carrying red coats for the troops. And
literally red coats.
Red coats, yeah. And the
coats that were red.
Right, coats that were red.
That's what they were.
But they would capture them so that we would keep them. And the Continental Army, by the end, their blue coats were ragged and falling apart. So there were quite a few Continental soldiers wearing red coats, which I can imagine would have been quite confusing.
Yes.
We're all concerned.
Yeah. But, on the other hand, if it protects you from the elements,
well, I guess that's what they thought.
You're making do with available resources.
Right.
Yeah, that was an interesting thing with the Martha Washington flag too, or the Betsy Ross flag, because the original colonial flags looked too much like the British flag when you were carrying them in front of your army, especially if you were wearing red coats and carrying a flag, you didn't know who to shoot at.
Yeah.
Interesting.
All right.
I love it. Well,
yeah,
I have one more. I have one last.
This is a good one. This is the only story that I had heard of before. So Jonathan Harridan and Greg Watson and Feb Byrne, they were all new stories to me, and awesome, and the type of story that I love. Right, Jonathan Harridan was just some guy who got a boat and decided he was going to fight for. He was going to become a pirate, basically a government-sanctioned pirate, and was able to protect the Republic that way. And Feb Byrne was able to get a constitutional amendment passed by telling her son to be a good boy and writing a 6-letter handwritten diatribe full of bad pun jokes.
Woo! And mom joke.
Yes. Yeah. And Greg Watson was able to stick it to his poli-sci professor at college, and I really hope that he got a signed copy of that amendment and framed it and mailed it to his teacher during their office hours. I think that.
And I just want to say to all of my students, whatever grade you get from Dr. Larish, go out and do things in the world.
Yeah. You want to get that letter. I feel like if you're the teacher, you want to get that. You want to get that like letter of like, here's that phrase. Yes. Here's that constitutional amendment that I got made.
Yes. I want to know that. I want to hear that you've done more.
Yeah. And so the last person we're going to talk about, he also did more. And he was the only story that I...
To put it mildly.
Yeah. He was the only story that I knew ahead of time. But why don't you tell us, AJ, about Frederick Douglass?
Okay, can I just intervene? Because Ben and I were on The Puzzler recently. The Puzzler with AJ Jacobs. And the puzzle was... hey, we're going to give you a clue. You, AJ, are going to give us a clue that ends in ASS.
Right, as in
because
badass.
We're badass of the week. Yeah. So I feel like this is converging.
Yeah.
Great point. That is because Frederick Douglass has 2 S's at the end.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Badass.
He's sort of the opposite of the, but he is a badass.
He totally is. Yeah.
And you could have, multiple episodes on Frederick Douglass. So I'm only going to touch on one small part.
You could do an entire podcast on him, just tracking his life from the beginning to the end, right? Like the
exactly.
history.
Yeah.
And for those who don't know,
give me a short version. I'm just kidding.
He was famous.
I'm just kidding.
He was an enslaved man, but he escaped and went on to become one of the great orators and emancipators of his day, abolitionist. He was a writer. He was brilliant. He was for the women's suffrage movement as well. So just an incredible human being. And
yes.
But the part that I talked about in my book was was his thoughts on the Constitution, because at the time, there was another very famous abolitionist named William Lloyd Garrison, who was a white man. And William Lloyd Garrison said that the Constitution is a pact with the devil. That was his quote. And that because it condoned slavery. And he said it deserved to be burned. And he did it. He would go on stage and burn the Constitution in front of hundreds of spectators. So quite the showman. And originally, Frederick Douglass agreed with him that this was a pact with the devil. But at some point in the 1850s, Frederick Douglass changed his mind. And Frederick Douglass decided a more productive way to look at the Constitution was to look at it as a promissory note. Because it does make these promises. It has language about liberty and equality. And yet, with America at the time had enslaved people. So he said, what we should do is, instead of burn it, make America live up to the promises that are in the Constitution itself. And that became a much more influential way to look at the Constitution. And Martin Luther King used that language of promissory note. Barack Obama gave a great famous speech on race where he said that the solution to the problems in the Constitution are contained within the Constitution itself, that the seeds of freedom are in the Constitution, and it's our job to bring them to fruition. So I just thought that was a wonderful way to frame the idea.
And I love this so much because with with William Lloyd Garrison, the Constitution, the one thing that a lot of people living today don't understand is how revolutionary it was to create a country that was a democracy, right? At the time, they were like, God shouldn't tell the king that he should rule over us and we should just do whatever he says because God wants him to do that. And if he wants us to dig ditches and dig latrines forever, that's what you got to do because that's the king. And if you argue with him, he has the right to cut your head off. That was the world for thousands of years, right? And in the 1776, which is not that long ago in the grand scheme of things, like great-great-grandfathers, great-great-great-grandparents maybe, that changed. And it was so revolutionary to have a government that was by the people and for the people and all that. You really don't. For Garrison, it was like burn it to the ground. The Constitution was, when the Constitution was written, there were factions that did not want slavery to be written into the Constitution. Even the Declaration of Independence, they wanted to write. Jefferson tried to write it out of the Declaration of Independence. It doesn't work, right? You have to make, in order for a democracy to function, you have to have compromise. And for Garrison, there was compromise. Okay, well, these people that wanted slavery had to compromise with people who didn't, and that compromise was that we had slavery. That's not going to work for us. Let's rip it all up and burn it to the ground. But for Douglas, it was so interesting because he was able to, what his argument after he changed it was, this actually works. This actually is a great idea and a great concept and a revolutionary idea that we should keep going. We should just redact that bit about and slavery is legal and everything else functions perfectly, right? If you just don't exclude this one portion of your population, actually too, if you count women who were also not written into the Constitution, if you don't exclude these two groups of people, this all works awesome.
Yeah.
Which I thought was a really great way of looking at things, right? We don't got to burn the whole thing down. We don't have to change it. We just have to make it do what it says it's supposed to do, right? We have to, the people of the United States.
Ideals.
Right, we the people of the United States. That's all the people in the United States, right?
Yeah,
it's the first three words.
And who are the people? Yeah.
I mean, yes, we are very lucky that it said we the people instead of we the white male people, but because we were able to expand who we the people eventually became, and still a struggle. I think you talk to historians, we have a ways to go, but I still like the idea that the Constitution is something to live up to. It's a promissory note. It's a moral North Star, and we can continue to make a more. I mean, that's in the preamble. More perfect nation. It's never going to be perfect, but we can fight to make it more perfect.
Yeah.
I like that.
Even if it's asymptotic, we can aspire to be better.
That's right. Exactly.
So, AJ, is that the takeaway from your project? Because you did do this for a year. You did try to manage. you did try to live according to the tenets of the Constitution for a full year. You're still married, I hope.
That's true.
Did your wife live constitutionally also?
Oh no, and she had some issues. At one point I quartered a soldier because that is in the Third Amendment. So we had a soldier living with us. She didn't love that. So yeah, she had
you don't have to. I thought you didn't have to. I thought that was I thought that was one of the things.
Well, that's true. The Constitution says you don't have to house soldiers in your home. You don't have to quarter them. But it also says if you do consent, that's also your right. So I figured it's a nice, hospitable 18th century thing to do, to have house guests.
So and also, how can you appreciate that amendment to the Constitution about not quartering soldiers if you don't know what it's like to quarter a soldier?
Exactly.
You have no frame of reference, right? You got to know.
He was very polite. Turned out he was a soldier who was a friend of a friend, and he was very tidy. I'm a big fan. I recommend quartering soldiers with your consent.
Yay!
But there were several takeaways.
And also, yay being good house guests.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Because Benjamin Franklin said that fish and house guests are two things that stink after 3 days, which I generally agree with.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Well, speaking of Ben Franklin, so there were several takeaways, I feel. One was that we have to try to make the Constitution live up to its ideals.
Woo!
And but there were several other takeaways, and one of them was because my favorite founding father is Ben Franklin. And what I loved, he talked about in the Constitutional Convention about the idea of epistemic humility, meaning that...
Wait, hold on. I just want to linger on that phrase. Epistemic humility.
I don't know the definition of either of those words.
You're being too humble. You're being too humble.
Yeah.
The idea being that we should be humble about what we know, about how right we are. So he said during the convention, he said, the older I get, the less certain I am of my own opinions.
Oh my goodness, yes, that's sadly true. Yeah.
I feel that way. I don't think it's sad. I think it's a good thing. I think it's good.
Shout out to all of our listeners who are getting older.
Yeah, but just it's okay if your opinions change when you get older and you have more experience and you meet different people and you see different.
Yeah,
democracy doesn't work if you're not willing to change your mind and learn new things and grow with it and be like, actually that thing I thought was actually that movie I used to like is actually not that good or whatever,
Right.
Or it's been visited by the suck fairy.
Yeah, so that to me is a huge takeaway. Like you said, democracy doesn't work without having some flexibility to change your mind when evidence is presented. And Ben Franklin told this story, which I love, because he liked his jests and japes. So he told a little jape at the convention. He said, there was this French lady who said to her sister, it's so curious, so strange. Why am I the only person I've ever met who is correct on every single issue? And his point was, we are all that French lady. We all think we're right on everything. But you have to be open to looking at the evidence and changing your mind. And one last point on that.
And that anecdote passes the Bechdel test.
You
had a woman talking to another woman about something that is not a man. Anyway, go on. So the point, AJ.
Hilarious. Well, yes. The last anecdote I love about this is that James Madison, father of the Constitution, on his deathbed, he made a strange face, and his niece was there, and she said, "Uncle, why are you making that face?" And he said, "Oh, it's nothing. I just changed my mind." And then he died.
My goodness.
So we don't know what he changed his mind about. It could be the wallpaper, could be the bicameral legislature. We don't know. But the fact is, the last thing he did on earth was change his mind. And to me, that's so inspiring.
Actually, the Bill of Rights is garbage. or actually I changed my mind. I'm not ready to die yet.
Well, okay, fair.
Right. Yeah. No, it didn't work out for him.
And I mean, that's deep wisdom, man.
I love it. And so, so there are many takeaways. It was a fascinating year, a weird year. Drove my wife a little crazy, but one of the big ones that I think is, if you want to be a real badass, then it takes some courage and vulnerability to be able to change your mind, because it's some people see it as a weakness, but I think it's a strength.
It takes courage and vulnerability to change your mind.
Yeah, it's a lot easier to say this sucks, I hate it, than it is to say hey, sorry, I think actually you might make a good point, right? Because you have to kind of that epistemic humility that you mentioned, you got to be actually I didn't realize that it was the way that you said it was, and you're making a good point, but that's not easy. It's braver to say actually I don't know the answer than it is to say whatever, this sucks, you guys are all idiots, and we could use more of that in political discourse from all corners of the political spectrum. AJ, this is great. This is really awesome having you on the show, and we're really happy to hear all of your stories and hear about your adventure with this year of living constitutionally. Will you tell us where we can find more of your stuff?
Oh, sure. It's I've got my website, ajjacobs.com. The book is The Year of Living Constitutionally. I'm starting a Substack because I'm told I have to, but I'm actually enjoying it. So it's called Experimental Living, and I try things out and write about them. So Experimental Living. And and The Puzzler, which features Ben and Pat, so listen to the Ben and Pat episode because it's a great one.
I don't know what Substack is. This is my thing about being living constitutionally in my real life, where I don't know what anything is. I just got a Facebook page.
I love that.
Substack is a thing where people who write long form things, which is where you take your quill pen and write like more than a paragraph.
Like Badass of the Week.
Yeah, exactly.
And you can publish it on the interwebs.
Mm-hmm. And people read it,
and people can read it. Yeah,
it's sort of a newsletter. It's but
that's a good way to think about it. Yeah,
I mean, you've basically been doing it for 20 years. So
I did it through GeoCities using a .txt file.
Wow,
I updated Badass was a text. Was a notepad. Yes,
amazing.
Badass was an HTML file through Notepad for the first 10 years of its existence. That's how retro I am.
Not quite quill, but very close.
No,
close as it gets, yeah. Okay, AJ Jacobs, The Year of Living Constitutionally. Please check out The Puzzler. Please check out his website. AJ, thank you so much for being on the show. It was really fun time talking to you and having you. Joy. I enjoyed going through your journey with the Constitution, and hopefully you enjoyed my journey of trying to drink horse milk.
Now that takes bravery. That and epistemic humility are the two really.
Those are the takeaways from this episode. Yeah.
Well, it was a joy.
Epistemic humility.
So thank you, and huzzah for badasses.
Yes, and we will see you guys on the next one. Thank you so much.
Love it.
Thank you.
Pat, you gotta say, stay badass.
Stay badass.
Right.
Badass of the Week is an iHeartRadio podcast produced by High Five Content. Executive producers are Andrew Jacobs, me, Pat Larish, and my co-host, Ben Thompson. Writing is by me and Ben. Story editing is by Ian Jacobs, Brandon Phibbs. Mixing and music and sound design is by Jude Brewer. Special thanks to Noel Brown at iHeart. Badass of the Week is based on the website badassoftheweek.com, where you can read all sorts of stories about other badasses. If you want to reach out with questions, ideas, you can email us at badasspodcast@badassoftheweek.com. If you like the podcast, subscribe, follow, listen, and tell your friends and your enemies if you want, as we'll be back next week with another one. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.